So this one is just called Kitchen Standards, and it's looking at just everything you do in the kitchen. So not everything, obviously, it's quite a vast topic, but we'll try and delve into this as much as we can. So, as I mentioned previously, preparing food for the Lord is an honouring prasada, very important components of our Krishna consciousness development, also part of the Krishna consciousness movement. Sometimes, as you've probably heard, we are referred to as the kitchen religion. So, obviously, if we're going to be referred as a kitchen religion, there's probably a lot of things we need to know about the kitchen. And of course, we know that Krishna declares in the Gita that offering food to him is an essential point of Krishna consciousness. Now, there's a lot more to preparing an offering bhoga than simply just cooking it. And we actually find that when devotees are doing service in the kitchen, there's lots of details there that they don't really they're not aware of or they miss. So hopefully in this session here you'll become aware of many of the different points that are there in the kitchen. And primarily, as I mentioned, two important areas of service in the kitchen. One is the items we can and cannot offer to the deities, and also the rules and different rules and standards, cleanliness, consciousness, all that kind of stuff that needs to be paid attention to in the kitchen. And as I mentioned, I briefly touched on this before, but I felt it wasn't really enough. We needed to go into this a lot deeper. So just also a reminder, we do have ISKCON Deity Worship Ministry does have a YouTube channel. I encourage you all to visit the channel, check out the videos we've got there. We've got some really interesting stuff. And also, if you like something, like on it, click on the like button. Also, please subscribe to the channel. By subscribing to our channel, it means that every time we upload a new video, you will get a notification of that. And of course, in the comment box down below the videos, if there's different topics you'd like to see videos posted on, please let us know. And the more more topics we get up there, and of course, if there's several votes for an individual topic, then obviously that will go first. Okay. And of course, if you want any more different topics on the webinar, same idea. Just in the comments here on Facebook or on Zoom, or I'll put my email address up a bit later. You can also check that out there. Okay, so I'll move on with that. Now, I'll just quickly cover the slides that we're going to be looking at here. So, what we can and cannot offer to the Lord, and what I want to do here is explore, the principles behind. Not just give you a great big long list of things that can be offered to the Lord, but look at the principles behind it, so we can actually make our own decisions on this. Primarily, we're talking about sattvic food, such as fresh fruit and vegetables, milk products, grains, things like that. Then what cannot be offered to the Lord, primarily non-veg, anything that's tamasic, anything you purchase in the store, or sort of stuff is there. And also there's a few other things we'll look at as well. Then I want to talk a little bit about the kitchen standards. Now, in the kitchen standards, we have things that are we've got to look at what's prepared purely, the consciousness in the kitchen, cleanliness, and also look at a little bit at the bhoga. Then also we want to look at the rules in the kitchen. And of course, one of the most important rules we follow anywhere in deity worship is cleanliness. Actually, not just in deity worship, in devotional service. Prabhupada makes the point in the Gita, he says that cleanliness is essential for making advancement in spiritual life. So if we're really keen to make progress in our spiritual practice, then you can't go past cleanliness. It's such a simple thing to do, but just by following cleanliness, it's really going to help us to come closer to Krishna. And there's a really nice class that Srila Prabhupada gives. In the class, he mentions that Krishna is the supreme pure, and if we want to approach the supreme pure, we must also become pure. So this is a very, very important part of our spiritual development. Okay, so, and just as I mentioned before, comments in Facebook, please. Any topics you're interested in, just let us know. Definitely willing to work on whatever you're inspired to hear about. Last week's topic, you may recall, was the different offenses in deity worship, and that was inspired by a friend of mine asked me to do that. So that it just goes to show that I'm willing to do topics that you find interesting. You can post them on Facebook. You can also email me at my email address, nrsimha.kavaca@iscon.org. Then, and also please visit our YouTube channel. Okay, so let's get into this. So the first thing I wanted to look at is look at offerable foods, and explore what kinds of things can be offered to the deity. Now, we really need to look at what are the principles behind this. Not just, of course, I can give you a list of things that can and can't be offered, but it's a little bit difficult to know what is available in every single country of the world. I'm sure some countries around the world have vegetables I've never even heard of. So, a little bit difficult to know exactly what what is there. So therefore, if we understand the principles behind these types of things, then we can easily understand what kinds of things can and cannot be offered in the various situations. And of course, the easy idea is just look at we offer fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, fresh grains, milk, products, etc., so all these types of things. But there's a little bit more to it than that, because sometimes there are fruits and vegetables which might not necessarily be suitable. So, and the main way of looking at it is to look at the modes of nature, because as we see in the Bhagavad Gita, actually I forgot to mention the reading that the things that I was reading to develop this, and I'll just share that with you now. So obviously Bhagavad Gita, chapters 14 through to 17, there's a lot of really useful and interesting information there, especially chapter 14, chapter 17. It deals a lot with, as you know, chapter 14 is the modes of material nature, and then 17 is divisions of the modes of nature, or how things are divided according to the modes of material nature. So quite a few interesting references there. Another really interesting reference which you might like to read is the Antilila chapter 10. And this chapter talks about all the different types of food offerings that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates would bring to him when he was in Puri. And there's many wonderful descriptions there. Also, in the 11th canto, the Uddhava Gita is there, starting from chapter 7. And this runs through basically to the end of the chapter. And there's a few really important chapters there. Of course, chapter 27 is Lord Krishna's instructions on deity worship. But then also we see in the other chapters, like in chapter 13, Krishna discusses different types of purity and impurity, and how, if we're eating things that are contaminated by the mode, or not just eating, but if we're associating with things, he gives a list of 10 items there. And if we're associating with things that are influenced by the modes of material nature, it will also influence us. So very important information there. Okay, so yeah, modes of nature. We'll look at that a little bit, and how the modes of nature affect us, and the necessity of developing goodness, and the role our diet plays in this. So a question might arise from that is, if I offer something to Krishna, doesn't it become transcendental? Therefore, why do we need to worry about what mode a particular foodstuff is? And this is, of course, is a valid question, because we know that things are transcendental. But one of the responses you could look at, or one of the angles you could take on this is, yes, prasadam certainly is transcendental, but we aren't at this point. We're actually affected by the modes of material nature because we are conditioned. We're in a material body, and because of well, at least I can speak for myself. I can't necessarily speak for all of you, but at least for myself, I can say that I'm affected by the material body, and I'm affected by the things that affect the material body. It affects my consciousness, it affects my moods. So, we're very much affected by these different types of things. And if I associate with something which is rajasic, that influences me. If I associate with something tamasic, that influences me. And I notice that when I associate with senior Vaishnavas, I become very influenced by their wonderful association. So, there's a very important point to consider. And one thing that, one verse I got, and this is the verse I was mentioning from the 13th chapter of the 11th canto, Krishna says to Uddhava, when the living entity becomes strongly situated in the mode of goodness, then religious principles characterized by devotional service to me become prominent. One can strengthen the mode of goodness by cultivation of those things that are already situated in goodness, and thus religious principles arise. So if we situate, Krishna is saying to Uddhava here, that if we situate ourselves in the mode of goodness, then this naturally just brings out the religious principles, that they actually rise automatically. And also we see a few other verses. I've got 4 or 5 verses here I wanted to read you from this section in the Bhagavatam. I thought they were very, very important. The next verse, this is verse 2 from the 13th chapter of the 11th canto. Then the one I'm reading now is verse 3. There's a few of them in succession there, so I'll just read them all. Religious principles strengthened by the mode of goodness destroy the influence of passion and ignorance. When passion and ignorance are overcome, their original cause, irreligion, is quickly vanished. So we can see here, Krishna is explaining to Uddhava that by cultivating goodness, then the irreligion or mode of passion and ignorance which give rise to irreligion are vanquished. And we see in this material world, which we're experiencing every day, that there is so much Raja and Tamagun. Therefore, irreligion is so prevalent. Whereas if goodness was prevalent, you'd find religious principles would also be more prevalent. Then the next verse, verse 4, according to the quality of religious scriptures. So this is interesting. He says, according to the quality of religious scriptures. So it seems also that religious scriptures have different qualities. And we understand, Prabhupada has explained, and we also see in various parts of the Shastra explained, for instance, with the Puranas, there's 18 Mahapuranas, and there's 3 divisions. There's 6 of these Mahapuranas are for those who are in the mode of goodness. There's 6 Mahapuranas who are suited to those in the mode of passion, and there's 6 Mahapuranas suited to those in the mode of ignorance. Not necessarily that the Shastra is influenced by these modes, but they are suited to the persons that are in these modes. So according to the quality of religious scriptures, water. So also according to the quality of water needs to be pure, not that it should be muddy or with bubbles or anything like that in it, or dirty. One's association with children or people in general, the particular place, the time, activities, birth, meditation, chanting of mantras, and purificatory rituals, the modes of nature become differently prominent. So these are the 10 things I was mentioning before, and this comes from the 11th canto, chapter 13, text 4. Very interesting and important information there. Then we'll skip over to verse 6 again. This is the last one I want to read a little while. Until one revives one's direct knowledge of the spirit soul and drives away the illusory identification of the material body and mind caused by the 3 modes of nature, one must cultivate those things in the mode of goodness. By increasing the mode of goodness, one automatically can understand and practice religious principles, and by such practice, transcendental knowledge is awakened. So we see here how Krishna is explaining to Uddhava in a very, very detailed manner how important it is, as long as we're situated in conditioned life, as long as we're influenced by the material nature and identifying with the body and mind, then we're going to be affected by modes of material nature. Therefore, we need to cultivate those things that bring about the mode of goodness. And by increasing the mode of goodness, we can automatically understand and practice religious principles. A very important point that Uddhava is making there. So we can see here from this discussion how Krishna is explaining the necessity for the modes of material nature. the necessity for understanding the modes of nature and also trying to come to the mode of goodness. Then the next point that that I'd like to just touch on is why it's important to offer things in the mode of goodness. We know that in the 15th chapter of the Gita, Krishna, he explains that I am the fire of digestion in the bodies of all living entities. So understanding that Krishna is the one who helps us to digest things, it seems to me reasonable that then we would give him quality foodstuffs, not we'd be feeding him unofferable or unpalatable things, which we find that many people in this world do. So an important point. And it's a kind of way of respecting the Lord is by always ensuring that we offer him the best quality foodstuffs. Then if we go on further in the 16th chapter, we can see how in 16, 23 and 24, I think they're the last two verses in that chapter, the Lord talks about the need for following the statements of the Shastra and how it's important to act according to the Shastra and not according to our whim. Because if we act according to our whim, we won't achieve success. But by studying Shastra, we can understand what our duty is, and through following our duty, serving Krishna and what way to serve Krishna, what particular mode of nature, etc., gradually will be elevated. Then Krishna also gives an analysis, particularly in the 17th chapter, of the modes of nature and foods and sacrifice and charity and all these types of things in the mode of nature. In the various modes of nature. So I just wanted to pull out a few points from there. So as you all understand, there's three modes of nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. Or as Srila Prabhupada would often say, ignorance, meaning that we're ignoring Krishna. So if we look at foods in goodness, for instance, first thing is it increases the duration of life. If you eat foods that are good for your body, they'll actually increase the duration of life. They purify our existence. They give strength, health, happiness, and satisfaction. And the purpose of food, actually, according to Srila Prabhupada, is to increase the duration of life. Also, foods that are in the mode of goodness are juicy, fatty, and this is not animal fat. This means like they might not like non-vegetarian foods might be fatty, etc. But they're juicy, fatty, they're wholesome, and they're pleasing to the heart. And you'll find that if you look at the list of all the different types of foods that are considered to be in the mode of goodness, they're pure by nature. So there's no need to purify them in any way. And of course, when we're cultivating the mode of goodness, we become peaceful, which then leads us to higher consciousness. Because when the mind is peaceful, we're able to meditate on Krishna. We're able to meditate upon the phrase that Srila Prabhupada would use is simple living, higher thinking. So by having a peaceful consciousness, then we can think of higher subjects. In particular, we can think of Krishna. And of course, the mode of goodness naturally pushes us to higher consciousness and helps us to develop real knowledge. Then in passion, if we look at passion, foods in the mode of passion cause distress, misery, and disease. And one of the reasons they cause disease, which then leads to misery, is generally foods in the mode of passion are very hot, and they tend to reduce the mucus in the stomach. When the mucus is reduced in the stomach, then the actual lining of the stomach is kind of really interesting. I mean, I won't get into it in too much detail, but there's a whole science about the structure of the stomach and all the different layers of bacteria and different things like that, and mucosal layers and all this kind of stuff. But and if that's in good health, then you can digest the food really well. But if it's not in good health, then you can wind up with tumors, you can wind up with ulcers, you can wind up with so many different problems. Even that they have this thing called a leaky gut syndrome, where the gut lining develops holes and things start to leak through. And this comes from eating foods in the mode of passion. So very, very important to avoid passionate foods. And we can understand passionate foods because they're too bitter, they're too sour, they're salty, hot, pungent, dry, and burning. And if we cultivate the mode of passion, then one of the things we find is we're not peaceful. All you have to do is just look around you in the world and see how many people are actually peaceful. Very, very few people you find in this world are peaceful. They're usually agitated by so many different things. And this is because of being situated in the mode of passion. And if one's in the mode of passion, they'll likely in the next life get a human birth. If one's in the mode of goodness, it elevates them to a higher consciousness. And of course, one of the symptoms of passion is greed. People become very greedy. And if you look at the world we're living in, so much greed. People are not interested in doing welfare so much for others. They're more interested in how they can accumulate more and more and more with the notion they're going to enjoy. But actually, as we understand, they don't enjoy. They wind up suffering and so much anxiety. Then in ignorance, foods in ignorance, usually things are prepared more than 3 hours before eating. Things that aren't fresh are considered to be in the mode of ignorance. But there's always a caveat to that. In that prasadam, if sometimes it's prepared and offered and maybe sitting for some time, that's okay because it's transcendental. And there's an interesting pastime described in the Antya-lila chapter 10, where what would happen is when the devotees would come to Puri to visit Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they would bring food for him, especially one year, when Advaita Acharya and Acharya Ratna and all these great souls, when they came, Acharya Nidhi, and so many different great souls, they also came with their wives. Their wives wouldn't come every year, but this one year they did. And so all the wives, Damayanti and so many different great souls, they're all cooking for Lord Chaitanya and taking every day, they were taking things for Lord Chaitanya to eat. And they give it to Govinda, and then Lord Chaitanya said, just put it in the corner, put it aside, and we'll take it later. And so after some time, the pile just grew and grew and grew and grew, and it's described in the Chaitanya Charitamrita how it got to one point where there was enough there which was more than one man could eat in a year. And so Govinda was starting to get concerned because he was telling everyone, because they were asking, did you give it to Lord Chaitanya? Did he eat it? And he was just, saying that, yes, I gave it to Lord Chaitanya. And so he was saying, I'm getting implicated in this dishonesty and I don't like this. And the Lord Chaitanya says, okay, bring everything to me, I'll eat it now. And so some of it had been sitting there for a long time, for a very long time, and yet by Lord Chaitanya's mystic potency, it was all still very fresh. So we can see sometimes that, this doesn't always apply, but by the Lord's arrangement, this remained fresh. Generally, foods that are in the mode of ignorance are tasteless, decomposed, putrid. They have a bad odor. Just like there's some fruits, for instance. There's one fruit that grows in Malaysia called a durian. And when I was a child, I spent several years in Malaysia. And I remember that the durian seller used to be down the far end of the market because most people didn't want to go there because the smell was so bad. So generally things that have a really putrid smell, we don't offer to the Lord. Also things like black salt, not a very pleasant smell. We don't offer things like that to the Lord. And things that are rotten. So things that are rotten, just like, there are many different types of foods that are fermented, like I think kimchi and what's that other one? Sauerkraut, things like that we don't offer. Also things like idli and these types of foods, the South Indian foods that are made from a rice batter that's been fermented overnight. Just anything that's been fermented, we don't offer that because it's considered to be in the mode of ignorance. Unless you prepare it on the same day. If things are prepared on the same day, then they're acceptable. But things that have been fermented overnight, then we don't offer those things to the Lord. Then also consisting of remnants and untouchable things. So generally speaking, this is more referring to remnants of non-devotees or just ordinary people. The remnants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and of saintly person, of course, are considered the most relishable items that we can get. And untouchable things, obviously, is meaning things like meat, fish, eggs, all that sort of thing. But and one of the problems with remnants is that they can lead to infection and disease. So, and of course, they are quite impure. So it's good to avoid eating things like that. And of course, someone who's in the mode of ignorance, they're not peaceful, being in the mode of ignorance leads to a lower birth. Also, it leads to foolishness, madness, and illusion will develop as a result of ignorance. So hopefully you can see by this comparison that looking at the different modes of nature, we can see what types of things that we offer to Krishna and what types of things we don't. Essentially, we're only going to offer food that is in the mode of goodness. We're not going to offer Krishna anything in passion or ignorance. So, you know, it's just like when we're cooking for the deities, for instance, sometimes devotees, you know, due to their upbringing, they like to use lots of spices. But actually, you know, Krishna doesn't eat really spicy food. I remember one time speaking with Janani Vasu in Mayapur, and he was explaining it because we worship Krishna in his Kaishori Lila as a youth, a young boy. So, you know, generally young boys don't eat hot, spicy food. That's usually older people in that sort of thing. And so with the food, it's not too hot, it's not too spicy, it's not too sweet, it's not too sour. It's just nice sattvic food. So by analyzing things in terms of the modes of material nature, then we can get a pretty good idea of the types of things that Krishna would eat. So therefore we can see that, you know, things like most fruits like bilva fruit, amalaki, dates, coconut, jackfruit, grapes, apples, oranges, you know, all these types of things are quite okay to offer to the Lord. Milk products from cows are fine to offer to the Lord. Grains, you know, ghee, sugar. Generally, you know, grains, they should be offered with ghee. It's actually in some statements in Shastra said that rice which is cooked without ghee is considered to be asuric. So generally when we're offering at least rice to the deity, Prabhupada favoured basmati rice, and so you'll always serve it with a bit of ghee. It makes it very palatable. Then, you know, sugar, and of course, you know, better to avoid things like white sugar, or if you are going to use white sugar, it's always good to check out how it's made. In some countries, it used to be quite common, but it's less common now because it's cheaper to make it artificially or chemically. But it used to be that in many countries of the world, they would use, they'd get cow bones and they'd put them in an oven and they'd sort of, like a kiln, you know, and turn it into a powder. They'd bake it and turn it into a powder, and they'd put that in the sugar to whiten the sugar. So, you know, you'd have to check out what goes on in your country, but I know here in Australia they don't do that very much anymore. At least I know our local sugar refinery doesn't do it. But then also the other thing to consider is that white sugar in particular, sugar in general, but white sugar in particular, is not very healthy for you. So it's good to you know, try to avoid sugar as much as you can. I mean, obviously, you know, like good quality sugar, you know, it's fine to use that. But you just have to be mindful of what sort of sugar you're using. So, you know, the Lord is pleased with items made with ghee, made with sugar, made with yogurt, made with jaggery. And the sugar, like generally in India, which is not so common in the West, but they use a rock candy sugar. And with that, you know, when you're using the rock candy sugar, especially if you're making drinks or making sugar syrup or anything like that with it, you need to, they boil it in a pot, and they put a little bit of milk on the top when it's boiling, and this helps the impurities to come out. You just need to be mindful that there are certainly impurities and things like that. So, and that's just generally due to the manufacturing process. You probably find that in countries where they have much stricter hygiene standards in the food processing industry, that you wouldn't have to worry about stuff like that so much. And of course, jaggery, bulgur, honey, chickpea preparations, dal, soups, wet sabjis, cakes, so many different things. And they're defined by things that can be licked, chewed, drunk, and sucked. These are the different tastes that are there, or different types of foods that are there. So, yeah, there's such a wide variety. And if you read the section in the Chaitanya Charanamrita, where the devotees are all bringing items to offer to Lord Chaitanya, you'll see there's such an amazing variety of foodstuffs there. And there's just one passage here I have here from there. They offered Lord Chaitanya pungent preparations made with black pepper, sweet and sour preparations, ginger, salty preparations, limes, milk, yogurt, cheese, 2 or 4 kinds of spinach. soup made with bitter melon, shukta. You know, your bitter, you use the bitter melon, and it's called shukta. Eggplant mixed with neem flowers, you know, that's quite bitter. That would be neem begun, and then fried patola. And even there's a description there of how Malini, no, not Malini, Damayanti, she made this one preparation. I'm not sure whether it was for Lord Chaitanya to eat or it was just to create fragrance. But what she'd do is she'd get mud from the Ganga and she'd dry it out, then filter it through a really fine cloth. And so she'd sift it through a really fine cloth, and then she'd mix it with various types of fragrances and stuff, and then roll it into little balls and put that in the bags with she made all these little bags, and she put those balls in the bags. So I'm thinking it may have just been more for scenting and not so much for eating. But maybe, I don't know, maybe Lord Chaitanya did eat it. And then in a letter, Prabhupada also describes foods in the mode of goodness, and in this letter he mentions that only foods in the mode of goodness can be offered to Krishna. And he says foodstuffs in the mode of goodness are wheat, rice, pulses, meaning beans and peas, sugar, honey, butter, and all milk preparations, vegetables, flowers, fruits, grains. So these foods can be offered in any shape, but prepared in various ways by the intelligence of the devotees. So, you know, there's so many different ways that food can be prepared. It's not that it all has to be prepared, you know, in one way, or you know, if you don't know how to cook Bengali or whatever, you don't necessarily have to do that. If you can, obviously, Lord Chaitanya favors that type of cooking. But if you can't do that, then that's fine. Then also Srila Prabhupada, he did like devotees to follow standard recipes, especially with milk sweets. There was one time in Los Angeles, devotees were making different types of milk sweets, and he called them concocted milk sweets. You know, they were using puffed rice and carob and powdered milk, food coloring, etc., peanut butter. And Srila Prabhupada said they were speculating. He said, you know, I have given you sandesh, rasgulla, and sweet balls. These are all standard sweets and very good. Why do they do these different things? So, you know, some preparations is good to learn, you know, the standard ways that Srila Prabhupada wanted. But then there is scope for making local preparations, as long as they're not forbidden foods, and that the items that you're offering are in the mode of goodness. Now, another interesting point that is there in a conversation that Srila Prabhupada had in Tokyo, I think it was in 1972, Bhanu Swami was there. And Bhanu Swami was asking Prabhupada about offering grains to the deities for breakfast. And Srila Prabhupada said actually that you don't offer grains for breakfast. He's saying no, grains only for Bholgati and at night. So Bholgati meaning the Raj Bhog at night. Now, this is something that's not practiced in ISKCON. We find that in ISKCON, even in some temples, you find for Mangalarti they're offering sweet rice. But you'll find it's quite common in many temples, especially the older traditional temples in India, is they don't offer grains very often. And if they do offer grains, they'll only be for one or two offerings. So Srila Prabhupada in this conversation was suggesting grains would only be offered for the Raj Bhog, the Sandhya Arti, and the Shayan, the Sandhya Bhoga and the Shayan Bhoga, meaning the last offering at night. So, yeah, it seems like a fairly widespread thing in ISKCON that most of the offerings they offer grains, but that was the standard that Prabhupada gave. Then, of course, there are different injunctions in the scripture. That if you don't have any cooked preparations, you can offer fruit. If you don't have fruit, you can offer edible herbs. If herbs are not available, offer pure water. And that's a very important point. Pure water is a very important element in deity worship. And always it's good to try to source water from the purest possible location. Of course, if you're in a situation where we live, all the water comes from the ground, so it's got quite a strong colour to it. And in some places, I know in Western Queensland, they get the water from the ground. It's got quite a strong fragrance to it. And in those situations, you're better off offering rainwater, even though there is prohibition in the scriptures for offering rainwater, it seemed that Sridhar Swami said that if nothing else is available, then rainwater can be offered after it sits for 10 days. So, there's different, adjustments there for time, place, and circumstance. But pure water is a very, very important item. And if all you have to offer is pure water, then you can offer pure water and at the same time meditate on offering really nice, elaborate preparations for the Lord. The main thing is mode of goodness. Now, just a little bit about frying foods. Ghee is the best. Most things should be fried in ghee, but of course one needs to become a little bit not necessarily expert, but just a little bit skillful at how to heat the ghee properly so that it doesn't burn, because it can burn easily, and if you burn it, it takes on quite an unpleasant taste. But ghee is one of the best best frying mediums, because it has a much higher flash point. Or not much higher, but it has a higher flash point than the other oils. You can also use coconut oil, sunflower oil, sesame oil, safflower oil, canola oil, or peanut oil. Although Srila Prabhupada's preference definitely was ghee. There are several times where he said things like ghee is for the inside and oil is for the outside. So especially in our deity cooking, recommended that only ghee is used. And just in case you didn't notice, Krishna's not a vegan. He does tend to like dairy products. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Then going on to the forbidden foods, mostly non-vegetarian foods, things that, and even, okay, obviously meat, fish and eggs, but also there are some foods that are too high in protein, such as masoor dal. We don't offer masoor. That's that reddish dal. And often you'll find people from Punjab will bring that to the temple. But we don't offer masoor dal because it's too high in protein. Soybeans and lentils also are too high in protein. Then anything that's stale, decomposed, frozen, vinegar, mode of ignorance, grown in the darkness, also mode of passion, anything purchased in a store. And Prabhupada was very clear about that, because the things that are purchased in a store, people, non-devotees, they don't really have any idea of cleanliness or anything like that. So when you buy things from the store, not very good as sattvic. Then also we can look at things like pre-cooked items, like parboiled rice, quick oats, even rolled oats. Rolled oats are actually cooked before you get them, so better you don't offer that to the deities. Anything else that's pre-cooked. And as I said before, anything too high in protein. Also yeast, we don't offer yeast to the deities, because it's kind of on that grey area between an animal, like an animal and a plant. So better we don't use yeast. Prabhupada also mentioned that in the letter, not to use yeast. Then, in terms of kitchen standards, things that are prepared purely obviously means prepared only by brahmanas. Consciousness of the cook, very important, enters into the food. Also, the kitchen is considered as good as the deity room. So the same consciousness that's maintained on the altar, we also need to maintain that in the kitchen. Also, it's good for the cooks to understand how an object, a person, becomes contaminated, how it's contaminated, become contaminated by touch, by consciousness, etc. How contamination is transferred. It's just like if you have a prasad item and a bulgur item. If the prasad item touches the bulgur item is contaminated. It's not prasadam, it's contaminated and can't be offered. Then also how to purify things. Then also understanding with bulgur, always should be fresh, nothing wasted. Prabhupada didn't like to see things wasted. Then just a few quick points on kitchen rules. Of course, we could go into this in great detail, but we'll just try to keep it fairly brief. Kitchen dress, if you have hair, whether you're a man or woman, cover it up. It's actually, in many countries, you'll find it's a health regulation that you need to wear hair nets and things like that. Good if you can avoid wool, especially coarse wool that tends to shed, and good to wear clean Vaishnava clothing. Personal cleanliness would mean freshly bathed before you're cooking for the deities, wearing tilak and kantimala. Wash your hands when first entering the kitchen, especially now in this era of COVID-19. We need to be really, really attentive to wash our hands at least for 30 seconds with hot soapy water. Yeah, and then if you touch your face, if you touch your mouth, if you touch your hair, wash your hands. If you sneeze or cough, then do it into the corner of your arm. So you're not spreading the germs all over the place. We also find that some devotees will do archment before they go into the kitchen. Also a good thing. Help with the subtle consciousness, the subtle kind of purity, consciousness. Then wash everything before you use it. Wash all the utensils. I mean, before I start in the kitchen or before I start setting up for worship, I'll clean all the benches. First thing, I'll clean everything down just to make sure that it's clean, that I know that everything's clean. Then wash all the utensils you use. Wash all the fruit and vegetables. What do you do if something falls on the floor? If it's raw, unprepared, and can be washed, then wash it. If it's prepared, like if you've made a samosa and you drop the samosa on the floor, and of course if there's nothing stuck to it, like sometimes on the floor there might be bits and pieces stuck to it. You can cook it, put it aside, and probably better if it's an already cooked samosa. It's like if it falls on the floor, put it aside. You don't offer it to the deity, but it's still considered to be prasad. So we don't waste things like that. But if something falls on your feet, it's recommended to discard those things. Then as soon as preparations are cooked, they should be covered. No one except the cook and the pujari should see the preparations. Therefore, it's better if non-Brahmins are not in the kitchen, or if they need to be in the kitchen, they shouldn't see any finished preparations, nor should they be preparing things like drinks, fruit, anything like that. They can roll samosas and chapatis and all that sort of stuff. They can pack samosa stuff, but they shouldn't be seeing the finished product. And then cover ghee when not in use, and store all the ingredients, especially dried ingredients, flours and lesser spices and stuff, in containers with lids on them. Keep everything clean: kitchen, stoves, ovens, fridges, inside out daily. Clean the pots immediately after use. No eating or drinking in the kitchen. And I encourage devotees to remove the garbage, and bare minimum every night, but better is after every offering. And prasad should not come back in the kitchen. Better if it can be transferred somewhere else. If it can't, then it has to be transferred to the kitchen. Do it quickly and move it out. Then consciousness is really important, because the consciousness of the cook enters into the food, what they're cooking. So try to keep the conversation, if you're going to have any type of conversation, to Krishna Katha. But better you have no conversation, because even when you talk, saliva may come out of your mouth and then it will get onto the bulgur you're preparing and contaminate it. Play traditional bhajan, it's not rock and roll music, anything like that. And as I was saying before, better if only brahmanas are in the kitchen. Then as far as kitchen utensils, avoid plastic utensils, avoid aluminium, avoid enamel containers, because they chip really easily. Yeah. And that's about it. That's everything I can think of, at least. So I'm hoping, I'm trusting that was useful for you. Yeah. So any thoughts on that? Any comments? Any questions? Please. Okay. Let me see. I've got some here from the Zoom meeting. I'm just going to start up my iPad so I can see what's come across on, if anything's come across on. Sorry. ISKCON Deity West Ministry. I do my best with the technology, but I don't always get it right. It's like, I find it challenging, to tell you the truth. All right, so.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Huh?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. I'm just asking about. I want to know regarding the consciousness. So when we cooking for the mass,
can you type your question, please?
Oh, sure, Prabhu.
Much easier for everyone. Thank you. All right, so I've got a few questions here. Vijay Baladev, I really appreciate Vijay Baladev because every week he asks some really nice questions that sometimes make me think quite a bit to come up with the correct answer. There's not meaning that I'm making the answer up, but sometimes I've got to think a bit about what I've read in the scriptures and stuff. If a certain temple who has set quite elaborate deity worship is now in a difficult financial situation, would you say it'd be okay to make the standard more simple and thus be more self-sufficient, or rather stick to the standard and fall more and more in debt? You know, if you can maintain the number of offerings and the basic standard of worship, fine. If it's necessary to reduce the quantity of the offering, like even sometimes, you know, I remember in Vrindavan, for instance, they used to offer 10 plates on the altar. That was 4 on Gaur-Nitai's altar, 2 on Krishna Balaram's altar, and 4 on Radha Shyam's altar. And then at one point when, I've forgotten his name now, it was the cook, he said to Prabhupada it was too much for him to maintain. So Prabhupada then approved of him reducing that to 6 plates, which is what they offer now. But even like, you know, if you're in a situation where you're offering, you know, quite a few plates, and there was less devotees or whatever, you could even reduce that down to less plates, just so there's not so much Mahaprasadam, and also because of the cost and things like that. So there are areas where you can trim things down. Better to try to maintain the number of preparations if possible. Also better to try to maintain the number of offerings you're doing during the day and stuff. Yeah, so there are areas you can definitely trim down to reduce the cost and things. But of course, of course, when you do something like that, offer a prayer to the deities, have the whole community come there and offer a prayer to the deities and pray to the Lord. Please, my Lord, we're making this adjustment right now. We're really, you know, sorry that we need to make this adjustment. We want to get back to the standard we had previously. Please help us to achieve that standard. And also, during this this time of COVID-19, there are a number of temples around the world just due to, I know one temple, for instance, they were having like, you know, 70 or 80 devotees each week coming engaged in service. And during the period of COVID-19, that dropped down to 6 devotees. So obviously they couldn't maintain the same standard of worship, so adjustments had to be made. So, you know, just be mindful that, you know, it's not always a black and white situation. Sometimes things do need to be adjusted. And I think if we stay personal, if we stay, you know, if we talk with Krishna about it, we tell him, well, this is what's going on, and we don't want to make this adjustment, we're kind of forced to by the circumstance, please help us to return to a better standard of worship. Yeah? Are papadams, are ready-made papadams allowed to be offered to the Lord? I see many temples do it, but it feels a bit like processed food. Are we allowed to use urad dal? CC mentions somewhere that lentils and urad dal should not be offered. At the same time, we fast from urad dal during Chaturmasha, which would indicate it's otherwise permitted. So at one point, Srila Prabhupada did say that they could offer papadams. He said because they're made by pious Hindu ladies. But I don't think the people who make papadams these days are probably so pious. So I would be inclined not to offer papadams because they aren't good. As far as urad dal, I don't know of any restriction against urad dal. If you, Vijay Baladev, if you can send me a reference where it says urad dal, then I'd be very interested to see that. Because one of Radharani's favorite preparations, which is offered in many temples on Radhasmi, is made from urad dal. It's a type of kachori using urad dal. So urad dal is quite common. But urad dal is high in protein, so we don't eat too much. Then Vijay Baladev's third question, to what extent should we consider the health factor in offering food to the deities? I mean, should we think of preparing healthy food or rather rich food? Prabhupada explained to the devotees that the food for devotees should be sumptuous, meaning it's well cooked, it's tasty, and the food for the deities should be opulent. Krishna doesn't have a digestive problem. We can wind up with digestive problems. And as we see, there's some lectures that Prabhupada gave in the early days in New York, and he said that Krishna can digest the whole universe, and he won't get indigestion. So, yeah, we don't have to worry about it. Of course, in the home environment, then you're going to cook for what's suited for the family. Obviously, you're not going to be cooking you know, mata paneer and deep fried, what do you call it, eggplant pakoras and making, you know, like six types of milk sweets in the morning for, you know, for when you get out of bed. And I mean, if we excuse me, if we ate the same way as Krishna eats, I think it wouldn't be very long before we became very sick. But you know, it's not a problem for Krishna. But it does mention in the scriptures that the foods we offer to the deities should be wholesome. So it means they should be made with good quality ingredients, not that we're using rubbish ingredients. So, you know, avoid white flour because white flour is bleached. All the nutrition's gone from it. You know, in India, they use what they call atta, which is a fine ground wholemeal flour. So, you know, avoid all these unhealthy things as much as you can. Sridhari Madhav Prabhu. We don't check the quality of bhoga before offering to verify whether spicy, salty, etc. So how to address the issue? It's kind of interesting. One time devotees offered Prabhupada something which is too salty. They said, you didn't check it first? So it seems like, you know, if there's some doubt, I mean, it's a little bit of a grey area, I guess, kind of thing, because some people say, well, no, you can't, you know, eat things before they're offered to Krishna. But, you know, if there's some doubt, if you've got some concern, then maybe, you know, like you might think you've salted it or something. I mean, I don't know. It's something that's definitely an opportunity to have a discussion about this, I think, a deeper discussion. Because we know, for instance, and obviously there would need to be purity in our intention. If we didn't have that purity in our intention, then probably we'd want to avoid it. But there's a really famous story, at least famous in South India. There was one of the daughters of one of the Alvas. In South India, they have the Alvas, which are similar to our Gaudiya Vaishnavacharyas. And the Alvas, one of these Alvas, I can't remember his name, had a daughter. It wasn't really his daughter, it was like a adopted daughter. And she used to make garlands for the deity, Rangana. And she would put the deity on, the garland on every day and look at herself in the mirror. And her adopted father would criticize her very, very strongly, saying, why are you tasting this? Why are you checking, why are you wearing the garland before you're offering it to the deity? So he stopped offering it to the deity. He got someone else to make the garland, you know, because several times he said this to her, and she kept doing it. And so he stopped offering these garlands to the deity because she wouldn't listen. But then, so he got someone else to offer the garlands. But then what happened is the deity wouldn't accept the garlands. So they put someone else's garland on and it fell off. Tried again, put the garland on, it fell off. And so it fell off several times. And I think he may have had a dream or something. I can't remember all the detail. But then what happened was he went and asked his adopted daughter, well, why are you wearing this before you offer it to the deity? And she explained, said, I'm exactly the same size as the deity. So I put it on me to see what it's going to look like on the deity. So if we have that kind of consciousness, then you could make a valid argument for sampling the bhoga before we offer the deity, just to make sure it's suitable. But probably in our conditioned state, we're not going to have that kind of consciousness. So better is we become good cooks. And then, you know, after you cook, you just sample a little bit of what you've cooked to ensure that it is suitable quality for the deities. And then, you know, from that you can learn to adjust. When we cook for a big feast or festival, this is from Dharma Krit Prabhu. Should we be same as cooking for the deity, or keep in mind the quantity of people? I think you probably find it very impractical if you're cooking for 1,000 people to cook the same quality as you would for the deity. And generally, yeah, you're going to have to make adjustments like that. So, yeah, I just keep that in mind. Yeah. Sweet meat mentioned in Chaitanya. This is from Radha Shalini. Sweet meats basically just means sweets. You know, things like, I'm not sure where this term sweet meat came from, but it refers to things like rasgulla, rasamalai, you know, all these different types of things. I'm not sure where the meat side came from. Milk powder, generally not. We generally don't use milk powder for the deities. Then David Prabhu from our head pujari from Durban has asked, with so many different cooks, many prefer to cook their own styles. Some temples place restrictions that cooks can only cook from prescribed recipes. Cooks are often not pleased with this and always complaining, affecting their moods while cooking. Which is the higher principle, to allow them to cook from the heart as they are inspired to, but with regulations, or should we keep the higher standard of cooking only from Jamuna Devi or Korma Prabhu's recipes? The thing is, like, if they're a good cook, I mean, my wife never cooks from a recipe, but everything she cooks is just fantastic. So if someone's a good cook, they don't need to follow recipes. If someone is not a good cook, or someone's learning how to cook, then better they follow a recipe. And then, you know, like sometimes you talk about styles. I'm not sure if you're referring to a personal style or a cuisine style, meaning South Indian, Bengali, North Indian, whatever, Rajasthani. I know, for instance, in Juhu Beach, or the ISKCON Juhu, is they have this system where on one day it's Bengali, on another day it's South Indian, on another day it's Rajasthani, on another day it's, you know, they have different cuisines each day. So then, you know, if cooks favour a particular style, then they could cook on that day that suits their style. But, you know, if cooks are not experienced cooks, then definitely it's better that they follow, you know, bona fide recipes until they become experienced cooks, because, you know, a lot of it is in the spicing, and you'll see that many devotees are not very expert with spicing, so they need to actually practice getting better at spicing, so that you know, we're not all experiencing some, you know, unusual, like putting sweet spices with savory spices, for instance, things like that. So it's very important they learn how to cook properly. This is from Kanakanga Chaitanya Prabhu. Sometimes when we are in the job and didn't get time to prepare fresh items for Bhoga, we prepare some items which is unoffered and keep in the fridges, and next day prepare from that. Do we, so can we do like this or not? Like dosa. I think in the home environment, it's a very different situation from the temple environment. In the temple environment, we do our best to make sure everything's fresh, everything's cooked fresh daily. Whereas in the home environment, there is a bit of scope for doing that, because otherwise, you know, you wouldn't be offering much to the deity at all. Yeah. Dharma Krit Prabhu, I answered that one. I'm not sure. Dharma Krit says we don't offer to deity in the temple. This temple, I'm not sure your second question there, Dharma Krit, what you're asking. Radha Shalini again. If you see someone's cooking is not high quality, what do you do? I generally think they are trying their best. I like how you say they should cook the same thing until they get more confident. Yeah, the thing is, I mean, the temple where I am, there's one devotee there. He's a senior devotee. He's not a cook, but every time he went into the kitchen to cook, he will cook with such enthusiasm and gusto, and he put his heart and soul into it. And every time he cooked, it tasted exactly the same. It was just inedible. But we can't say that he doesn't have bhakti, because, you know, he certainly has bhakti, yet he's not really a cook. So just because someone can't cook something doesn't mean they're lacking in bhakti. It just means they can't cook. And you know, we all have our different abilities. You know, some folks some devotees are very expert at you know, one service, like some devotees are very expert at book distribution. I mean, I've tried book distribution, and you know, I went out for quite a while doing it, but I'm not very good at it. Whereas some devotees who are expert at book distribution maybe not very good at deity worship. I know one devotee, for instance, a very dear friend of mine. He's an expert manager. He's GBC actually, and when the Panchatattva installed, I asked him to come and assist with the Abhishek, and it was kind of watching him putting the chadar on. He couldn't figure out how to put a chadar on. You know, so does that mean he doesn't have bhakti? Does that mean no? It's got nothing to do with it. It just means that that's not his expertise. So different devotees have their different expertise. Now, if someone's really enthusiastic and they want to cook, they want to do nice things for deity, then we need to somehow or other try to inspire them to learn. This can happen by, like when I used to be the head Dietary here a few years back, and what I would do is whenever anyone new was coming to cook, I would have them assist one of the more expert cooks so they could learn different recipes and things like that, so they could, you know, so we could maintain, you know, consistent standards of cooking. Yeah, I don't know what they do in Budapest. Some prep every day, I don't know. Atreya Rishi Prabhu. Thank you. Dairy milk is an increasing issue nowadays due to the way the cows are treated in dairy farms. What is a good compromise if a hicks of free milk is difficult to acquire? And as you said, Krishna is not vegan. Any views from Srila Prabhupada on this? Well, it's kind of interesting. Here, where I live, we have a Goshala. And one of the devotees who, and he's a senior devotee, he's been around quite a long time. And he's been around longer than I have. And he makes the point that, yes, obviously, if we can get a hinks of milk, that is better. But even better than a hinks of milk is milk from Krishna's cows. I mean, even a hinks is kind of like, really, that's not our kind of concern. Our concern is it's coming from Krishna's cows. It's coming from protected cows who are loved by devotees, and they're Krishna's cows. But we don't always have that option. We don't always have that opportunity to get milk from Krishna's cows. So then the next thing we would do is get it from a Hingsa cows. Even the temple here is because our property is not big enough to maintain enough cows to keep the milk supply going. So the management here is considering approaching one of the local farmers and asking them, because there's a few dairy farmers in the area, and we'll sponsor cows, so you look after cows and you don't kill them. So maybe that's an option. But the main thing is that, like, getting back to the point that this devotee Krishna Kirtan Prabhu makes, is that even if we take the milk, and I know a lot of devotees don't necessarily agree with this, but that's okay, that's their right to disagree. That even if you take the milk from cows that aren't protected and you offer that to Krishna, those cows get the benefit. So, that's another consideration. Now, there was a point in time in America where I don't know if it still happens or not, but the milk had a vitamin E supplement in it, and that came from cod liver oil, which is a fish. It came from the oil from a fish's body. And Prabhupada, as far as I understand, he okayed that because it was the only milk that was available. So you have to look at time, place, and circumstance. If you can get something that's better, then you need to. You can't say, it's too expensive. That's not really a valid kind of excuse, because if you're willing to make that sacrifice for Krishna's pleasure, then he can easily make the arrangement so you have the finance to be able to do that. But yeah, we always try to get the best thing we possibly can for Krishna. But of course, things must be, we don't go in that vein. We don't go buying imported fruits and vegetables from another country and pay 10 times the price, when they're out of season and stuff. No, according to Nectar Devotion, we offer fruits according to season. So everything should be according to season too. Not that we're making ridiculously expensive and difficult arrangements. So it needs to be sort of natural as well. So yeah, just do your best in terms of acquiring products like that. And I think the last one we've got here, and we'll wind up, is can we use condensed milk for temple deities? Interesting point, Yogeshwar Govinda Prabhu. It seems like there is a recipe in the first cookbook for making, what do you call it? Caramel. And in that recipe, they're using condensed milk, sweetened condensed milk. Now, it seems like in things like that, like with these pure items, Srila Prabhupada did tend to have a little bit of flexibility. But generally speaking, I would encourage you to make these things from scratch yourself rather than purchasing things to cook. Because also, non-devotees have really poor standards of cleanliness. They have really poor standards of consciousness. When I was a teenager, I used to work in food processing places, and honestly, what goes on a food processing place, you would never, if you knew, you would never eat these things. And the last one is tofu. This is from Shama Priya Dasi. No, we don't offer tofu to the deities because it's a soy product, and also it's prepared by non-devotees. Okay, so as I mentioned at the start, please visit our YouTube channel. Have a look at the videos there. If you any other videos you want, then please let us know. Subscribe to the channel. Send me in any topics that you want me to discuss. There's unlimited things we can talk about. So just let me know, and look forward to serving you all to the best of my limited capacity next week. So Prabhupada, thank you all.